There are so many people and they all have different personalities. Well, there are several personality typologies that want to make things easier for us by sorting people into a couple of types. But does that really work? We will find out today. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I'd like to discuss personality typologies or personality assessments. What is this all about? Well, as we know, people are different, but maybe not that different because there are several personality typologies that claim that there are actually 4 or 8 or 16 types of people and we all fit into those categories. I will briefly describe a few of the most common examples to you. One of the earliest forms of personality typologies was the temperament theory from ancient Greece. There, people believed that we have certain bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile, and if you have too much of one of those, then you develop a certain personality. You can become choleric, then you are irritable, aggressive and dominant. You can become sanguine, which means you are cheerful and active, or melancholic, where you are very thoughtful, or phlegmatic, where you are passive and sluggish. At least in Germany, those terms have survived in day-to-day language, but otherwise this theory doesn't appear anymore nowadays. But as you will see, modern typologies are not that different. Very popular are typologies that use a cross of axes and a 2x2 matrix. And the most popular of those is the disc model. We have one X whether we are outgoing or reserved, and another X whether we are oriented more towards people or towards tasks. So we end up with 4 possible combinations. Those are all given a name abbreviated with a single letter. The D type, D for dominance, is direct, impulsive, self-confident, and someone who gets their way. The I type, influence, is open, creative, lively, and inspires others. The S type, S for steadiness, is patient, empathetic, and modest, and a faithful helper. Finally, the conscientiousness type C is a systematic, precise, and an analytical thinker. There are a couple of variations of this model and similar models. At least in Germany, we have several variations depending on the company, depending on the license holder. There are models that use colors instead of letters. There are also variations where you have mixes of types, so you end up with 8 types or 16 types. There are a couple. License holder of DISC, by the way, is John Wiley and Sons. Besides DISC, the most common, mostly used personality assessment is MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. Here we have 4 factors with 2 possibilities each that are marked with letters. For my drive, for my motivation, I can be extroverted, E, or introverted, I. My attention can be focused on intuition, N, or it can be sensory, S. My decisions can be based on thinking, T, or feeling, F. And my lifestyle can be based on perception, P, or judgment, J. Let's say I have I and N and F and P. then this is the type I end up with, INFP, marked by this 4-letter sequence, and I can look up the traits it is supposed to have. In this case, INFP is idealistic, compassionate, and a creative problem solver. Then, since we have 4 categories, 4 factors with 2 possibilities each, we have a total of 16 possible personality types. There is also the so-called Enneagram, a more esoteric typology. It has a nice mystical symbol, a circle with a kind of 9-pointed star in it. Here we have an emotional, intellectual, and instinctual center, each with 3 possible types, so we have a total of 9 personality types. When I mentioned the term esoteric, you probably also thought of astrology, the zodiac signs, horoscopes. Those don't exactly fit here because there your type isn't identified using some assessment, some questionnaire, some test, but you are just assigned a zodiac sign at birth depending on your birth date. But they are not that different from personality typologies in regard to the descriptions. Those personality typologies are quite popular and they are also used in a business context, for example in the job application procedure or in personal development. In Germany, for example, there was a study by the University of Mannheim in 2004 where they checked 41 big German companies, and it turned out that almost every second one uses a personality typology, and DISC and MBTI were the most common ones. Well, they are used a lot, so are they actually any good, those typologies? Well, categories are firmly established in our language. When our ancestors came up with spoken language, they probably at first didn't bother to name each individual flower and whatnot, but they probably thought, well, let's distinguish between edible and poisonous plants, or maybe between prey and dangerous animals. Simple, pragmatic, practical categories that help in day-to-day life, because often I don't need to know what exactly it is, but just how it is relevant to myself, what I can do with it. Now, if we apply categories to people, things get more difficult because we have the issue of stereotypes. Let's say I mention an IT expert. Basically, this is quite a simple and distinct category. It describes a profession. However, when I mention an IT professional, you probably have a certain image in mind. It probably is a man rather than a woman. It is likely someone wearing glasses. Maybe it's someone inept at social interactions. So there are lots of cliches that go along with it. And things get really dark and problematic if we consider terms like immigrant. Why is that? Well, if we form categories, we have to draw boundaries, and those boundaries are somewhat arbitrary and they distort our perception. Let's look at an example. Here I have person A and person B, and those two are quite similar. That's why they are so close together. And we have person C, who is quite different from those two. Now, someone establishes a category and draws a boundary, and suddenly B and C are supposed to be very similar because they are in the same category, and B is supposedly totally different from A because they are in different categories. This boundary can be a geographical boundary. Let's say B lives within sight of A and B has to drive several hours to reach C. Yeah, but this is Germany, and and this is France, and Germans and French, those are totally different types of people. It can also be a temporal boundary. Let's say B is born a mere year after A, and B is born 10 years before C. Yeah, but those are Generation Z, and those are millennials, and we know they have totally different attitudes. Or it can be some personality typology. Let's say B has answered just 1 or 2 questions on the personality assessment differently from A, and has given quite different answers in comparison to C. Yeah, but this is the yellow I type, and they are totally different from the red D type. Well, that's a lot of nagging, but those personality typologies, they are based on scientific research, are they not? This is what they advertise on their websites and in their brochures and so on. Well, not quite. The issue here is that psychology has changed over the years and over the decades. In the past, for example, at the time of Sigmund Freud, it was perfectly alright in psychology to just make up a theory, to just say, well, based on my experiences and beliefs, this is how people work. And you were not expected to actually prove that. And it was not necessary that your claims fulfilled any scientific criteria, such as to be falsifiable, for people to be able to actually check your claims. Nowadays, psychology works quite differently. Nowadays, in psychology, if you make any claims, you are expected to provide proof, to do experiments, studies, and to check whether it actually works as you believe. And your claims are supposed to be falsifiable, so it needs to be possible to check your claims and to disprove them if they are wrong. The theories and ideas those personality typologies are based on would not pass as proper psychological research nowadays. Furthermore, the personality assessments, the tests used to identify your type, usually don't fulfill scientific criteria either. There are a lot of requirements for scientific tests, such as reliability, validity, and so on, and they are usually not fulfilled by those personality assessments. This means, for example, it is perfectly possible that let's say you want to identify your MBTI type and you perform an assessment from one provider and you perform an assessment from another provider as well. It is perfectly possible that you will get 2 entirely different results, that you will end up with 2 different personality types. It is even possible that you perform an assessment from one provider today and you perform the same assessment from the same provider in a couple of months and you still get different results. Now, you might wonder, but those typologies must work after all, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't be so widespread and popular. Well, in a way they do. If I perform such a personality assessment and I get a description of my personality, I will usually say, oh yes, I think this is me. In my perception, this test has worked. in my perception is the important part here. As viewers of the channel know, we can't always trust our own perception because there's the issue of biases and fallacies. And there are a couple of biases and fallacies that are quite helpful for such personality typologies. First of all, most important, the so-called Barnum effect, which we already discussed in a separate video. Briefly summarized, the Barnum effect means if I get vague and general personality descriptions and I am told this is you, this is a description of you, I tend to say, oh yeah, it somewhat fits. I believe this test has worked nicely, instead of saying, oh well, this applies to half the population. What rubbish is this? And there are further biases and fallacies that are relevant here. For example, in The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli, there is a nice example for the so-called self-serving bias. We haven't discussed that one in detail yet, but we will at some point in the future. There was a study where participants got a fake personality description, not actually based on some questionnaire they filled out, but just the standard text. 2 variations of a standard text to be precise. Half the participants received a personality description that was rather positive, where they were given positive traits, positive characteristics. The other half of the participants received a negative description, where their personality was described in a more negative way, where they were assigned negative traits. You probably know where this is going. Those people with the positive results, they said, oh yeah, this is a great personality test. This result, it fits me perfectly. A great test, everything is fine. And those with a negative result, they said, oh well, this doesn't fit me at all. The personality test is rubbish. Now obviously the personality types in the popular typologies are all described in a positive way. Now you might wonder, doesn't word get around eventually? Won't people become aware that those personality typologies are actually rubbish and pretty much worthless? Well, some people who use them actually are aware that they don't really produce any results that are really worthwhile. However, a lot of people still stick to them, and the most common argument is because they are so simple. They are so easy to use, easy to explain, even management understands them, so I'd rather use them instead of something that's more complicated. Imagine your computer breaks down and you call your company's IT department, tell them, yeah, I need a new computer. And some IT person comes around and brings you a mechanical typewriter and says, yeah, well, computers are so complicated, but this typewriter will do just fine. Imagine you want to build a house. And the architect tells you, oh, calculating statics is so complicated. I made this model from Lego bricks. I think it will do. Imagine you visit your doctor, your physician, and he tells you, oh, this is some complicated illness you have there. I don't really know how to diagnose that. Let's just do a bloodletting. It worked fine in the Middle Ages. It will probably do. You probably wouldn't be happy with that. The best answer to this issue of being simple and easy I've seen so far is from German psychologist Uwe Peter Canning from the University of Osnabrück. He pretty much said, we expect from IT experts, engineers, architects, physicians, and many more that they face the complexity of their field of expertise. that they deal with it. And we should apply the same standards to human resources and not just say, oh well, theories and ideas and methods that are 100 years old and totally outdated, oh well, they will probably do just fine. We should catch up to the current state of research and the most modern methods we have available. One thing I would like to add here is that those popular personality typologies are only that simple if you pretend that they work and that you get meaningful results from them. If you explain all the shortcomings, all the problems and limitations they have, they are no longer so simple. Now, you might still want a personality test, and you might wonder whether there are any that are scientifically recognized. There actually are. There is the discipline of personality psychology that deals with the topic of personality. There is still controversy there, but psychologists are pretty sure that there are a couple of personality traits that can be identified and measured. And particularly well established are the so-called Big Five. This has nothing to do with the book by John Strzelecki, but the Big Five of personality psychology are extraversion, openness to new experiences, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism, or positively phrased, mental stability. There are other lists, other tests. For example, Hexaco is also popular, which measures 6 personality tests, and a lot of tests include further traits. But one thing they all have in common, and that is, after you've completed your personality assessment, as a result, you are not assigned some standard type, but those traits are all individually measured, and they are measured on a scale. For example, from 1 to 9, or 0 to 9, or 1 to 10. So you get a detailed description of your personality. You get a personality profile instead of just being assigned a type. And this gives you a much more differentiated description of yourself that much more takes into account your individuality than some standard typology where you are assigned 1 out of 8 types. And by the way, if you want to use such a scientific method in business, for example, to test job applicants, they are not necessarily more expensive than the popular personality typologies. I think there are only 2 groups of people anyway. Those who have already subscribed to the channel and those who will hopefully do so in the future. At least I would be quite happy about it, especially if you also give the video a like. Thanks a lot for that. We will see each other again next week. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.